Hey everyone, welcome back to another edition of Outdoor Hospitality Weekly. I'm Alex Burkett, joined as always by Matt Whittemore. Matt, I'm going to kind of, kick this off and open to you, knowing you've had a little bit more of an exciting couple of last weeks than I have. Obviously, we're into the peak camping season here in Michigan, coming off of a couple really fun weekends. We did a great Mother's Day weekend with some cool experiential things here. I know we've talked a lot about that on the podcast and been trying to actually put some of the lessons and things that we talk about into practice. So we did some cool like paint and sip activity and just really like leaning into the outdoor and nature parts of our property, and guests love it. So but enough about what's going on with me. Like I said, a little bit of a boring start, but I know again you had a chance to travel a little bit and get to see some properties, connect with some cool people. So why don't you just give folks a little bit of update as we kick off the news this week?
Yeah, so had a fun little trip down to Florida, which was great timing because we just had a overnight freeze here in Syracuse. Go figure. Yeah, a
That's
couple
New
weeks
York
ago.
for you.
Yeah, a couple weeks ago we had a little bit of snow, so today's a beautiful day. The freeze wore off, and it's a spectacular upstate New York day, so I can't complain. But it was nice to get down to Orlando, take a dip in the pool. It was actually my 35th birthday, coincidentally. So took the wife and kid down to Orlando, and they hung by the pool while I was at the conference. And this is my first time at the Florida Alabama RV conference. Didn't really know what to expect, and I would preface this all with saying that I'm a New Englander. I'm in upstate New York now, and I am not super familiar with the Florida market. I'm learning it, obviously, through Unhitched and Climb Capital. We have a presence there, so I'm becoming more familiar with it. But it was a really educational, 3 days in Orlando, getting to see a lot of the operators. Had a really awesome conversations with a bunch of different operators and peers in the industry. Shout out Yale Realty. They always put on a great dinner. Been fortunate to have been to a few of those, and sat next to some really interesting people. I think made some friends, made some colleagues, keeping in touch with people, uh, exchanging ideas. AI was a big topic. Just interesting to see people excited about it from all different corners of the industry. We had all types at that dinner, and I kind of went on a little bit of a impromptu monologue about all the stuff that we're doing with AI, and it was opening a lot of people's eyes, and I think we're just scratching the surface ourselves. So, um, I think overall the takeaway was that, and this is not to disparage any other regions in the country or any other operators, but it feels like there's just a level of sophistication among Florida operators that you don't typically see on average in other regional conferences. And I think that's primarily because there's so many RV parks in Florida. Shout out Brian Searle. He did a great presentation alongside Scott Barr, and it was all about how competitive the market is, right? Like the average RV resort in Florida within 25 miles has like 85 competitors or so, like, and that's just bananas to like you and I. We think about that, and like, where I come from, Massachusetts, there's 100 campgrounds in the whole state.
Right.
And those are spread out pretty well. So New York, there's a few hundred campgrounds. There in New York's a big state. Michigan, I think there's only, a few hundred campgrounds, maybe 500-ish. And so it's a forcing function of, the cream rises to the top when there's competition like that. But just a lot of really smart conversations, learned a ton about the market, some really interesting sort of legislative updates. There's a lot going on in the state and in certain counties with property taxes and how
Hmm.
hospitality properties and how RV parks and campgrounds are taxed. And there was a really interesting development on um, campsites, right? The actual legislation of campsites and lodging units. So I think there's maybe an opportunity to do some interesting things with some small overlooked RV parks and campgrounds all around Florida. So we'll be cooking on that in weeks to come.
Yeah, and especially, insurance also being a major factor in Florida
Mhm.
with, weather, natural disasters, and things like that. I mean, Matt, as you lay out that, and obviously, both Scott and Brian, are data junkies, like I think sometimes we are as well. With that, what do you think that the general takeaway was? Like, we're going to talk data here in a minute on the national level, as far as were people more optimistic? Were they less optimistic? I know, we here in the Midwest like I'm seeing mixed signals as we've talked about the last couple of weeks. Certain things tell me, in our business, we're doing, quite well compared to where we were at this point last year. But I know that's not the story as I see in Facebook groups and people talking, I would say fairly regularly about in certain areas or in certain segments of their business being down. So what was just the general sense of things as we kind of get into some other stories and data later in the episode?
It's a really good question, and what I keep coming back to, and this will tie into what we discuss later. Um, Marketing is a huge expense, a huge investment. Payroll was one of the things that has just continuously jumped out. I've experienced it personally in a big way, that a lot of people out there are talking about how payroll is doubling on them over a period of a couple of years. And it sounds crazy, but it's the reality that we live in. Um, what else? I don't. That's really all that comes to mind. I mean, there's a demographic shift. There's a consumer demand shift. I think we've kind of beat
Right.
that dead horse a bunch over the last few months. Um,
Yeah.
big
Just
big
go ahead.
focus on capex. There were a lot of presentations on capex and valuations. People seem to be keyed in on what their park is worth, how to improve their parks, how to maximize the value of their parks, whether or not they're really focused in on a imminent sale, right?
Hmm.
People seem to be like getting really smart about, you might not be selling, but you should be maximizing the value of your park all the time, because life happens, illness, death in the family. What are the broker cliche, like the three D's: death, disease, and divorce. You never know when those are going to come, or just somebody knocks your socks off with a huge offer, and you want to be educated on what your park is actually worth. So
Well,
just
and
seemed
that
like
and
a
that makes a ton of sense, just with the number of competitors and just kind of like, the Florida Alabama show I've gone to in years past as well, and it's always interesting timing, right? Because just as the rest of the country, like here, we're gearing up for busy season. Obviously, it's kind of the reverse down in the southeast, so it's always interesting to get a read on just kind of where that is, because this is kind of the last moment in physical conference where people can connect before we hit October, November, when OHC happens and all of that. So yeah, always interesting. I'm sure it sounds like really, really fun opportunity. Obviously, you're a business development networking guy at heart, so I'm sure that was just a really, really fun time and awesome to see
yeah,
everybody there.
yeah, it was great.
So with that, let's dive in. I know we got kind of big news story that we'll talk about first before we dive into some data and give some updates on a couple stories that we've covered over the last couple weeks. So let's kick things off, Matt. We seem to be bouncing between the Midwest and the Northeast. This one, we're staying in the Northeast here in Maine. So after years of growth, expansion, and becoming, I would say one of the largest and most recognizable destinations in Maine. One of Maine's biggest campground properties is officially back on the market this week. I think the story came out just about a week ago from us recording now. We're talking about the latest chapter for Sandy Pines Campground. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce this Maine name. Matt, you might have to step in with the city here. But Matt, if you can just set the stage with Sandy Pines, what developments we've seen up to this point, and what this latest chapter of I think it was chapter 7 bankruptcy means for not only this property, and just there's a lot of interesting, really multi-layered, faceted parts of this story with everybody involved. So I'll let you set the stage for Sandy Pines and what's happening with this bankruptcy.
Yeah, it's a unfortunate story. I feel like we've touched on it maybe because this has been one that's been cycling through the news for a little while now. It came up for sale with a hotel broker because this is a marquee asset, right? This is like a legacy, nationally recognized campground, right? I think this originally they were looking to sell this for like in the mid to high $20 million range.
Mm-hmm.
It's a revenue generator. It's Kennebunkport, Maine.
There you go.
And I mean, this is like premier Southern Maine beach community. This like rivals like Cape Cod in terms of New England vacation spots. And
this thing's almost like 50 acres, right? I feel like that's a lot for Maine or in the Northeast. Typically, you don't see properties that big.
Yeah, and I've been to this campground a few times, and really cool glamping sites overlooking, like, it's not really beachfront, but it's on a marsh. And so you have like incredible bird watching, just an open, expansive view of a marsh. It's one of these properties that I think about. You look at it from an objective, non-biased standpoint, and the highest and best use of this property is probably not a campground. I don't know. I'm not intimately familiar with the zoning, but I would imagine if you could do single family homes, you could develop a bunch of beach houses essentially on this property, and it might be worth a lot more that way, or some other type of mixed use or residential development that just has more liquidity and has more revenue potential. But that being said, it's an unfortunate story. It's a group that I've become a little bit familiar with called Atlantic Hospitality.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have any insider knowledge here, just reading what's come out in the news. The owner of that company is a gentleman by the name of Tim Harrington, who got, really, I vacation in this area, so like I feel like I know this area a little bit. But I don't have any actual like insider knowledge to this at all. From an outsider's point of view, Tim Harrington and Atlantic Hospitality, pillar of the community, well-known developer, really awesome hotel, primarily hotels, taking a lot of times historic bed and breakfasts, hotels, inns, and renovating them, putting a bunch of money into them, taking a lot of times blighted, kind of neglected properties and giving them new life. And, prominent member of the community. And then this news started trickling out probably like 6 months ago. And it started with disputes over contractor payments.
Mm-hmm.
And it came out that it was $14 million that was allegedly unpaid to contractors at not at this campground, at another project in Mount Desert Island in Bar Harbor, near Acadia National Park, more north, a few hours north in Maine. And so this is, obviously somehow linked to that. Obviously the ripple effects of lawsuits and whatever has led to this bankruptcy. And so it was being shopped before this news came out really widely. And obviously then kind of the distress became apparent, and it's come out. There's been a few news stories. Really unfortunate. I hope it, lands in good hands. I think the story said that there was liabilities. The
Right about
liabilities are north of 20 million.
right compared to just
So
16 million in assets.
right, it's kind of going back to my early career days of it's with a company called Keenan Auctions, and my first job in real estate was monitoring foreclosure auctions around New England, mainly around Greater Boston. So I'm very familiar with Keenan Auctions, and so they've got it. They're doing a sealed bid process. It was delayed. It was originally a March auction date, and just some delays with the bankruptcy proceedings. I don't think there's a fresh date yet, but something's going to have to happen sooner rather than later. And
It sounds like by the end of May seems to be the date that I'm
yeah,
seeing. Right at May 27th is the U.S. Bankruptcy Court, District of Maine's bid. It has to be submitted before May 27th. So just in a
yeah,
couple of weeks here.
yeah. So
Which, and I think also, Matt, interesting that the property seems to be indicating they're going to continue running through all of this. So obviously, imagine, I look at it from the GM seat of you have all this community PR with a major name like Atlantic Hospitality stacked up against getting ready to open and Memorial Day weekend in a couple weeks, and just the complexity that I'm sure that's adding to the on-site team's operation, just to maybe
yeah,
get cash to get landscaping done or make sure that the team continues to get paid, right? It's just always a really hard thing when a property's going through a transition like that. So yeah, kind of wild that it's not as though the property doesn't seem to have any plans shutting down, which I think is smart considering, right? You still want the property to have revenue coming in, customers still, unfazed by the business problems, and probably positions the asset, better for going through this bankruptcy process for a
right.
new
And
buyer.
you bring up a really good point, because there's no real indication here that there's distress at the property,
Correct.
right? This is all
The website looks
external.
great. Like as you
Yeah.
said, the property looks incredible.
And this thing is a well-oiled machine. Like it's won, I think it was, I don't know, in the Camp Spot Awards, or it's been featured in the Boston Globe. It's won awards. It's recognized as like a top national campground. It's a well-oiled machine. It's
Yeah,
high
it was a
quality.
runner up for best glamping in 2024 by USA Today.
Right. Yes. Yeah, that's what I was recalling. And all different types of accommodations, highly amenitized. It's an amazing top of the line campground that I imagine in a vacuum is probably doing just fine. It's this kind of external uh distress in my mind that is unfortunately forcing a sale here. And it's too bad. I wouldn't be surprised if it gets developed. I hope it doesn't, because it's an amazing place. Maybe somebody adds more lodging to drive revenue, and it stays at least to some degree campground. But it's that perfect mix of like really nice amenities. You got your park models, you got your seasonal RVs, you got your transient RVs. It even has tent camping. Really amazing setting. It's like really high end, but also classic New England family campground. It's got kind of the best of both worlds. So it would be a shame to see that go away.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, definitely a story that I'm sure we'll keep up to date with. As you said, Matt, more developments have been coming out with this trickling in, Monarch Campground and Woodalls and the local news sites for this property for months. So I'm sure we will hear if and when the property does sell and go through bankruptcy. We should hear about the new ownership and hopefully some future plans to continue growing this thing and making it the incredible asset that it is. So With that, let's dive in, Matt. I know we've talked a little bit of data the last several weeks, and we kind of missed this report. It slid under, I think, a lot of people's radars, including myself and some other folks that I've had a chance to talk with. OHI, the outdoor hospitality industry, released their version of the 2026 Outdoor Hospitality Industry Outlook Report. Now, this, Matt, I know we talked offline before we started this. This is very, very similar to their benchmarking reports that they have released for several years now. I think, their 2023 and 2024 benchmarking reports we've covered in the past, and those have been pretty good resources. They've kind of reformatted this as I've gotten to peek under the hood in my new role with OHI and just kind of seeing some new things that they're doing here. But essentially, this survey went out to a wide variety of respondents. I think it was between, right about 3,000 campgrounds is what OHI is mentioning that the audience pool for this had about a 10% response rate. I think it was between 50 and 100 folks ended up responding back to this survey data. And this is really supposed to be, as the name implies, both an industry outlook as well as just a current snapshot of where the industry is at, what are the numbers, what are people seeing, what's kind of the pulse check of what's happening within the industry. And there's a ton of, this report is massive. It's a lot. And certainly we are not going to touch on all of the subjects in this today, but we'll cover a couple of things here. I'll call out a couple things, Matt, let you respond and feel free and add your own of what came out of this report. But a couple of things from my perspective, again, looking at this from the GM lens that I thought was interesting. One that I saw from, if you look at the expense side, Matt, as you mentioned from the Florida, Alabama show, a lot of talk about payroll, what your operating margins were, what's happening with insurance and taxes. Another line item that we've seen as well, and I felt the impact on, is credit card processing fees. OHI has done a lot of work on this in the lobbying within the federal government, trying to fight back with fair credit card processing rates. And in this report, the average or median credit card processing fees for last year were around $8,000. This year, they're citing an average of about $21,000. So, close to tripling in that line item. If you're looking at your P&L, that's pretty substantial. And this is something that, we're a CampSpot customer. We use Card Connect for a lot of our payment processing, like most CampSpot parks. We were also affected by this and have had to since, work with the, credit card processing company, Pfizer, to try and lower our rates as well. This is something that we've been impacted here. So I certainly think that it's real. It's certainly something that, we've seen other line items get talked a lot about. Payroll, insurance, taxes being top of mind is where people have seen a lot of expense growth. This is one that I think will start to be talked about more and is something that I know OHI is working with a lot. The other one, and I'll just call out these kind of core performance metrics from the report, citing occupancy, ADR, and RevPass numbers. So the average occupancy found in this report was about 57%, with an average daily rate of $56 and a revenue per available site of $35. So I think, this whole premium versus kind of low-end inventory management is interesting. The yield with those numbers seems, I would say, fairly promising, considering the variety of respondents that you could get in a survey like this. So I think that's fairly healthy numbers. But Matt, like I said, these were some of the core things that stuck out to me. Either what do these things say to you, and were there some other interesting things that you found from this data as well?
Yeah, really good questions. First, on the credit card fees, it's such an interesting conversation. And I feel like I might be changing my view on this stuff as I get more educated and talk to people like you that are probably more keyed in on the climate and like what's happening. I've always battled with it, right? When you talk to mom and pop campground owners and they don't want to accept credit cards at all. They're completely, averse to any credit card fee, right? And I've always thought like, yeah, it kind of stings, right? When you see, I get it, right? You see $1,000 booking or a $500 booking and it's $15 or $30 right off the top. Or
I mean, look, with our seasonal sites,
Exactly.
our sites go between 6,000 and 7,000 is what most of our sites are going for.
Right.
That's a $200 to $300
Yep.
credit card processing fee expense on that. That is insanity if we were to eat that.
Right. And I don't disagree. Where I
But
challenge
but
that,
where's the but? The but's coming.
yeah. So like just having and you and I have workshopped on this and
Mm-hmm.
brainstormed and consulted on this stuff a bunch. And right, I've operated campgrounds where, the policy shifts from checks only to, all right, now we're going to implement online booking, we're going to implement credit cards. And I've always been all for it. I think part of the hospitality business is a customer should be able to pay any way they want to pay. If they're showing up and they're trying to give you money, take it. If it's a jar of pennies and they're trying to give you 10,000 pennies, take it, right? Because you say, no, I can't accept that. They're going to disappear for 2 weeks or a month. And, you might get partial payment. And then you're in this, accounts receivable cycle. And, right. And I've battled on this. Like, in some states, you cannot pass on the credit card fee. So that's another whole layer here.
Mm-hmm.
In some
Especially
customers.
in New York, right? You have to kind
Yeah.
of have an advertised posted cash discount. You can't, yeah, it has to be, yeah, I believe you have to go the discount route with certain payments. You can't
Yeah.
charge premium price or, or tack on a fee to a credit card booking like that.
Right.
Which, yeah, it does make it complicated, especially when you're in a high regulation state like that.
Right. Which to me, so say you have 20 seasonals and they all pay $200, there's a $200 fee that you're eating. Was that $4,000?
Mm-hmm.
That's
It's hard because, right,
that's
that's
somebody's bonus. That's a repair. That's a deferred maintenance item.
it's almost another seasonal, right? It's like you almost got 21 seasonals instead of 20.
Right. But there's also a chance that you were also going to waste $4,000 in labor collecting, maybe not those 20 checks. That's an extreme example. But if it's like, half that number, it's 2,000, it's like, are you going to, as the general manager or in between your staff, whatever, is there going to be significant brain damage and a check bounces or a check gets lost or somebody says they mailed the check and it never shows up? Like that stuff happens inevitably. And, it might not be a total 1-for-1 offset, but there's brain damage there that accepting credit cards alleviates for sure. On the accounting side, automated right into QuickBooks, on the actual physical collection of money, the depositing of checks, the depositing of cash, the handling of cash. There's whole SOPs and there's a lot of management that I think people don't think about. So for all those reasons, I've always just been like whatever, it's 3% plus 30 cents. I don't care. Like, it's streamlined, it's easier, it's integrated. I think there's a higher rate of collection the more options you're giving, and then you just got to play the game of, do I pass it on? What state am I in? How can I pass it on? What is that gray area? What risk am I taking on? Such an interesting conversation. So many different opinions and viewpoints. People get real passionate about it.
I agree with almost largely even everything that you said, because, right, it is a bit of a, I do have to play sometimes the debt collector role, and it's not fun.
Yeah.
And it adds that extra time to what could have just been put your freaking card in the system
Yeah.
and hit checkout. And then I never have to see it
Get them
again.
a text with a payment link, an email, whatever.
Exactly.
You run into them in the park, you've got your tablet, like.
Where I think this is frustrating, particularly for these sets of numbers going from 8 to 21, is I don't think that has, right, that doesn't have anything really to do with the campers or the customers. That's all the credit card merchants that are now jacking those prices up on us, that make it more difficult for your philosophy, Matt, to trickle down to the campground owner who still won't come over. It just adds another, like, okay, if it used to be $8,000 that I might have had to weigh and stomach and figure out, okay, what's that delta between how much time am I actually going to spend, to now if it's 20, Well, now that person just became even more ingrained. It's harder to convince them to make the switch. That for all the reasons you talked about, like
Yeah.
trying to control or have a cap on credit card rates, or to just better understand why such a significant rise in cost so quickly in the credit card processing rates. It's not as though we're talking about going from 8 to 9 or 8 to 10. We're talking again, it's like if your electric were to just triple all of a sudden overnight. Like
Right.
that's a lot. As you said, what is, an extra $11,000-$12,000? That could be an extra member of staff. In the report as well, I think the average staff profile for a campground was like 3 full-time and 3 part-time team members, which feels about right, citing that the average size park was about 100 to 150 sites. That's okay. You can see maybe if those full-time team members were either your GM or you're the owner and you're full-time,
Yeah.
that kind of pencils out. But now it's, instead of what used to be minimum wage for a lot of team members, now it's, 15, 16, $17 an hour. So that extra, $10K that you're now having to pay the credit card companies just to take your payments, that could be those 1 or 2 part-time members of staff that you talked about
100%.
too. So it's like, well, instead of giving the credit card company that extra 12, I'll just hire an extra member of staff, still go my archaic system of, checks and cash. And sure, even if they have to collect, I still have another staff member that if they're not collecting, if they're not in this accounts receivable mode, they can still do office work. They can still cut grass. They can still clean toilets. So I just think it makes it harder to get people to see where you're coming from and the efficiencies with this rapid rise in rates.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting, and certainly something that I hope that the tide changes course and that some form of legislation. I know the Trump administration has talked about this. Like I said, I know, Paul and the team at lobbyists have been sent trying to work on this, the Credit Card Competition Act, and it's a big deal. So yeah, super interesting. Great points, Matt. I just think that, yeah, this doubling and tripling of rates is just going to make it all the more difficult to bring campground owners into the 21st century when it comes to things like payment processing and artificial intelligence and all the rest of this stuff.
Well said.
But what else? What else did you see from this report that either stuck out to you? Does the occupancy, RevPass, and ADR data seem to make sense with what you guys are seeing in the Southeast? Like anything stick out to you as far as from this Outlook report? What's seen? I know one, Matt, another one that I'll mention that we've talked about in the past, even from the survey respondents, 83% of the parks from the survey were surveyed as independent or family-owned mom and pop operators. That still leaves only 17% that fall under our buckets, right? Corporate or franchise owned. So I think that although we talk a lot about the corporate players in the space and the acquisitions news and what's happening with bankruptcy proceedings like Sandy Pines, this is still just less than 20% of the industry that we're talking about. It's just, that's the part that makes the PR and the news that comes out, and where we're all trying to see what each other are doing, but still largely a mom and pop business at heart.
Big time. Big time. And yeah, whenever I see these reports, I gravitate towards the confidence indicators and the barriers. And so I think these sum up where the industry's at in a big way, right? In last year's report, 15% cited staffing as the number one barrier. That's doubled to 30%.
I was about to say, I'm like, yeah, it seems low compared to the talk we hear.
Right. I mean, to me, that's the whole game, right? If you can't staff your park the right way, you're not going to perform anywhere near your potential. Um, I think there was pretty interesting change with uh confidence level, right? They measure
Mm-hmm.
confidence level a few different ways. From the negative side of it, last year 24% said they expected no barriers to them achieving their budget, their revenue targets. That was down to 14% saying no
Wow.
barriers this year. So big swing there.
And shows you, right,
Um,
especially when this survey was taken. I don't believe, I would have to go back and actually find the date of the survey and the poll, but this is not really factoring in any of these recent economic headwinds as well. Anything
Correct.
that happened with the, what's happening in Iran, the gas prices, this whole, I know it's been like pandemic crazy all over the news with this whole hantavirus cruise ship stuff, right? And
Yeah.
although,
Crazy.
right, like I don't think anybody, either one of us, Matt, or saying that we're into the next COVID pandemic, but how does that affect consumer confidence? Just if people are stopped going on cruising, even if it's just for a couple weeks, right? We're about to
Right.
enter Memorial Day. What if people just, like whatever, I'll just stay at home and have a barbecue, and they don't take that trip that like
Yeah.
AAA is projecting, and right, like Memorial Day usually has 40 to 50 million campers that go. If
Crazy.
just
Yeah.
a fraction of those folks stay home because of economic headwinds, that has a dramatic impact at how all these properties operate, including all of ours. So yeah, it's kind of crazy.
It is. It is. Pickleball came up, and so it's the second year running as the number one amenity added.
I love it.
Um,
I love our pickleball court. Amazing.
yeah, we bought like a stencil for our driveway, and we have it painted on the driveway. So we had a little pickleball tournament for Mother's Day in our
I love it.
driveway, getting Charlie
Yeah, it's great.
practicing a little bit. So yeah, but in terms of the economic stats, right, seemed pretty well in line with what I expected. What jumped out at me was actually the set of respondents here, the actual data set. These are monster campgrounds, right? The median total revenue was 5.5 million. The mean was 16.4 million. Expenses median 3.73 million. Uh, mean was 9.52 million. And these are monster revenue parks, not
Like
monster.
portfolios. Yeah.
Yeah, these are right. The median park was 105 rentable sites on 30 acres. So these are big. They have to be big ancillary revenue parks because no parks are doing that, right? That's what 50,000 revenue per site. If you
Hmm.
if the medians line up, they probably don't. But
Yeah, I don't know. I don't
so
know anywhere that's getting 5 to 6K monthly for their RV sites. If so, please fill me in on how you're
yeah,
doing that. I would
right.
love that.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think these seem to be highly transient resort quality parks that are probably in that like 35-ish% NOI margin range.
Hmm.
So just I think it helps to kind of paint the picture of like what is the median and mean park that we're talking about. Um, a lot of people raising rates, so there seems to be some maybe false false confidence in the idea that revenue is going to go up, in that it's tied to them knowing that they raised their rates, and people expecting occupancy to hold. That's the X factor here in my mind, right? They know they raised rates, they don't know where occupancy is going to land. And I think for all the reasons you stated, with everything that's going on, travel industry, economic sentiment, confidence, consumer behavior, we might be in for a rough patch occupancy wise. So time will tell.
Well, and that's pulling from now a couple of weeks ago, before our interview with Billy Ryan, talking through some of the camp spot data, and I talked through some of the transition and repositioning that we've done here. You are starting to see like what is the reaction of that, and how can, if we're not going to meet those occupancy demands because of this, what are you doing to reposition your park out of that? And for instance, we have a lot of there's a lot of construction happening here in Michigan right now. We have road construction project, there's some solar and work for linemen, and we've really had to shift and reposition the business around trying to fill for that occupancy, because that's the demand that I'm getting right now, where taking 20 sites or so and converting those to either monthly or seasonal long-term renters was the right move for us in our location. It was what was going to allow us to meet the revenue targets that we had set for this year. I know not all parks have the luxury of that, but I think even in conversations, right, in the, OHI Young Professionals calls that I have, and talking with other park owners here in Michigan in regional meetings, like, a lot of people are shifting. Whether it's a shift like ours or not, there is somewhat of a shift that's happening in, what are you doing, especially if your business model has relied on high transient traffic and high ancillary revenue, right? Jellystone parks are famous for that kind of model. There's a lot of parks in the Southeast and resort style properties that have to capitalize on that type of model that may not be able to take full advantage of it this year like they have in years past. So that shift is real, and hopefully, hopefully those parks are getting enough demand on the other side with long-term traffic, or trying to figure out creative ways, storage packages, right, of trying to buy, sell 2 weekends back to back and store in the middle, right? There's all kinds of creative specials and things that, through the marketing that is becoming more expensive to run ads, and that customer acquisition cost is ever higher. These things are real. We're seeing these same sort of impacts too. So, yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how this shakes out. Like I said, I know our park and individual parks that I hear are having way better years than they have had in past, and I hear the complete opposite thing from about as strong a group. So I don't know that there are many parks that I've talked to that are kind of like, yeah, things are exactly the same as what it's been the last couple of years. Like, I've heard many times that there are shifts happening in different segments of people's businesses, whether that's positive or negative. So yeah, super interesting.
Such a micro business, right? Every park is unique. Every location's unique. I try to caution everybody on that a lot of people love to cite, oh, there's, like you said, there's 50 million people camping and Memorial Day, and there's only, so many campsites, though. There's, now the number of RVers is down in a big way, right? And the latest number I saw was like 9 million RV owners compared to like 11 million a few years ago. It's still way more RVs than there are campsites, and people love to cite these macro national stats. It's not a national market, right? It's not even a regional market. It's every campground is supremely unique and has a very unique offering, and you got to know your offering. You got to know what the people want. You got to know your tiny little niche market and how you compare to the people down the road, because those are the only people that you're benchmarking and truly competing against, right? All this benchmarking data is good. It gives you an idea of, oh, okay, my payroll should be less than 20% or 25%. My general and administrative expense should be less than a few percent, or whatever it is. It's helpful, but it's just loose context, right? Two parks can have similar offerings and be 10 miles apart, and like one can be crushing it and one can be having its worst year ever, and we can speculate as to why, but so much of it is just micro nuance.
Exactly. And yeah, I think you nailed it as far as like control the controllables that you have within your business and make the best businesses. Like, your business better than anybody else. My responsibility as the GM is to know our park and make the decisions for our park, not for what the economic headwinds are happening even within Michigan, right? I think Michigan, they're projected like there's 1 million people that are going to be traveling for Memorial Day in Michigan, right? But my responsibility is to get my 157 sites full. Like, that's it. I'm focused on 157, not 1.1 million Michiganders. So yeah, it's it very well said. I think that sums up great with the reporting and just kind of what the outlook is for the industry. But Matt, as we close up here, I'm going to shift gears and we'll touch on a story that we again covered 2 weeks ago that we have a quick update on. Now this story I think is ending where I kind of thought it was going to end all along, but you never know. And it was again just such a big topic of conversation that we had to cover it. There's been multiple sets of reports that have come out. I'm looking at one from WSBT, but Business Wire RV Business, RV News have all reported that Lippert Industries and Patrick Industries have called off their proposed merger between the two companies. As a reminder, this was going to be a merger of equals between the companies, so neither one would have, absorbed each other. It would have been just a combined operation between Lippert and Patrick. The only details we've gotten were that just the companies were not able to agree to the terms as they were going through negotiations. And again, I had questions all along, Matt, as to whether this was even going to go through, with monopoly conversations, right?
Yeah.
And whether or not this was going to survive that with, Brandon Carr and what's happening at the SEC and everything like that. Like, I just was unsure it was ever going to make it to the finish line, even if the two companies came together. But any final thoughts on this Lippert Patrick story? Did this surprise you at all? Was this what you expected as well? Do you have anything to add to this conversation?
I think it was expected. I think it's probably for the best.
It's probably the best for the RV consumer.
Right. Yes. Definitely for the
I don't
consumer.
know about the stockholders, but
yeah, fair. Yes. I would say that from the perspective of the consumer. I think it trickles down to the parks too, right? We're hearing talks about partnerships with manufacturers, with like service centers at RV parks. Our friend over at RV Help, businesses like that.
Yeah, Heath Paget and his company
Heath
is a
Paget,
great
right? It's becoming a much more interconnected industry. It's always been there, right? The old mom and pop campground, you have the repair guy that's his name's up on the bulletin board. And
funny enough, I don't know that we ever talked about this, but we used to have here at Alice Springs like mobile home sale and service facility at the front of the property.
Okay.
Long before that, it was just as the campground was starting 20 years ago. So to your point, this used to be kind of a thing in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. Yeah, it's always been synonymous.
Right. But yeah, it
thought that was
down,
a fun story there.
Yeah, that's cool. It trickles down with, the direct relationships between manufacturer and park operators, but also just through those independent inspectors and repair people. They, have their preferred manufacturers, and it's all interconnected. So it definitely would have. I don't know how, but it would have trickled down and affected us all as consumers and operators.
Well, and I'd say, look, it's more frustrating for the consumer if they have to get aftermarket parts or support from a Lippert or a Patrick. That just adds more friction and maybe less use as that camping consumer. So, yeah, it certainly is better for the consumer. And yeah, I figured we'd touch on that as a footnote here as we wrap things up. But Matt, with that, I think we've got I've got one more week here as I'm gearing up for Memorial Day. I'm sure we'll be back for that week, and then we will see that following Tuesday of Memorial Day whether or not we'll be back. And I've got the energy to record this one, so you might see 2 episodes and then a break, mostly because I may need a day off to recover there.
Yeah.
But
I don't blame you.
Yeah, apart from that, hope everybody had a fantastic Mother's Day. Hope everybody's gearing up for what should be a very fantastic, heavily traveled Memorial Day season. And with that, Matt and I will see you back here next week for one more episode before all the chaos. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Alex.